Everyone, this meeting has been recorded, as you have here probably. So welcome to the launch of the Mixed Migration Review 24 on migration politics, migration narrative, and public opinion in 24. We are just waiting for a couple of additional minutes, 1 minute or so, because we see that people are still joining. So we are here, but let's wait for an extra minute. I think we can start, and people will continue joining. So again, welcome to the launch of our mixed migration report. My name is Roberto Forin. I'm the Deputy Director at the Mixed Migration Center. I'll be moderating and facilitating the launch today. So before starting with the event, we just want to have a quick look at the agenda together. So Asma, if you go to slide 2. So as you might have seen in the invitation, we will start with a welcome opening remark by Rafaela from Bosch Foundation. I'll say a few words about her later, and by Bram, which is our director at the Mixed Migration Center. And then we will have a panel discussion, which I will be moderating with 4 panelists. Andrew Geddes, Daniela Mojor, Francisco, Javier Boqueza Abia, and Sophie Beau. I'll say more about them later. And then we'll have a question and answer with the audience, which we hope is going to be the most interesting part of the conversation of the event, because we really like this to be a conversation as it is happened in previous edition of the launch. So perhaps before starting, just a few housekeeping rule. So we invite you, the participant, to interact with each other via the chat box that you see open on your right. If you have any question, we will kindly ask you to put them in the question answer box, which you can find below. So try to use that instead of the chat to ask questions. It will be much better. So we will do 2 things. We will try and see whether we can start answering already in writing to your question where is relevant. Otherwise, we will keep the question and ask them to the panelists at the end of the panel and when we open the question and answer. If you like to ask your question yourself, please raise your hand, and then we will unmute you and turn on your camera at the end so that you can ask the question yourself. And I think that with this, we can move to Rafaela. So Rafaela is the director of the Robert Bosch Shift to Migration and Immigration Society program, where she works at the intersection of local, national, regional, and global effort. She works on migration, inclusive society, digital technologies, global governance, and others. She's also a chair of the European Philanthropic Initiative on Migration, EPIM, which some of you might know, and is a 2003 Yale Award Fellow. and she holds a Doctor of Philosophy for the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg. So welcome, and then the floor is yours to open this launch, Raffaella.
Thank you so much, Roberto. It's such a pleasure to be here and to join you for this launch of this very special report again. And in a year where nearly half of the world's population was heading to the polls, it couldn't be more timely to come up with this. And I mean, as we all know, migration continues to dominate political agendas, spark public debates, shape policies that affect millions of lives. And the Mixed Migration Review has really become, from our perspective, an indispensable resource for those of us engaged in understanding and addressing migration. And it doesn't just provide data and analysis, it tells the human stories behind the headlines. So this year's edition, as it takes a deep dive into the politics of migration, exposing how narratives are being constructed, manipulated, and weaponized, reminds us why evidence-based insights like those found in the report are essential for countering misinformation and fostering informed debates. So from our perspective here at the Robert Bosch Foundation, we see the Mixed Migration Review as more than a report. It's a tool. We use it to inform our work with policymakers, with civil society, with communities. And it has repeatedly also helped us to inform our own work, our strategy, and understanding global trends. And also from where I'm sitting, the German lens, migration holds, as we all know, a very particular significance. Germany's role and policy are once again in the spotlight, reflecting the tensions between national politics and European solidarity and international cooperation. And as the Mixed Migration Review of this year also highlights, migration debates are not just about policies, they reflect the values that we stand for as a society. And personally, I often think about the people behind the data, the migrant who risks everything for a safer future, the policymaker balancing very competing pressures, the journalist trying to convey its message amidst the noise happening around the issue. So the Mixed Migration Review really connects these perspectives, making it a really essential read for anyone working toward a more humane approach to migration. So I also want to take this opportunity of the opening remarks to congratulate the Mixed Migration Center on their excellent work with this report and way beyond. Thank you for the partnership. So also your contribution to the migration world and beyond is critical, and we are very much pleased to be working with you. And so thank you to all the contributors. I very much look forward to the discussion today with such a fantastic panel. Thank you. You're muted.
Sorry. I will say thank you, but for more thanks and more opening remark, I will give the floor to Bram Froese, who is the MMC director, is one of the editors of the MMR this year as every year, and is also the founder of the MMC. So, Bram, the floor is yours to continue with opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you for your kind words, Raffaella. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Once again, welcome at the launch of the Mixed Migration Review 2024. This is actually the 7th edition of our annual flagship report since we started this series. And it's really great, again, to see such an interest in this report, with, again, so many people joining the event today from all over the world, actually. I can see we have still people coming in, but more than 140 people online already. So before telling you a little bit about what's in the report this year, it went online this morning at 10 o'clock. There's a link to the report in the chat, but I can imagine you did not have had a chance to go through the whole report yet. But let me start with a few words of appreciation first. First of all, of course, a thank you to all the donors of the Mixed Migration Center. and in particular the three that are directly supporting the development of this report, which are the foreign ministries of Switzerland and Denmark, and then, as you just heard from Raffaella, the Robert Bosch Foundation. Huge thanks also to all the authors of the essays in this year's edition, to the interviewees, to the migrants we interviewed, and of course to today's panelists for joining us in this launch. And of course, a big thank you to Chris Horwood as the lead editor of this report, not only this year, but for 7 years now. And never say never, but as it stands, Chris, this will be the last MMR we developed together for now, even though you might remain involved in some ways in future editions. But I think that's worth a big virtual applause for you, Chris. Thank you very much. So about the report, as Raffaella also said, 2024 was the year of elections. Half of the world's population has voted this year. And as we all know, the issue of migration played and continues to play an important role in many of these elections. And that is why we felt politics and migration had to be the overarching frame of this year's MMR. And we can see that politicians, governments, and by extension policymakers feel under constant pressure to address or better to reduce, to prevent, to stop irregular migration. And some politicians, of course, don't just feel this pressure, they actually fuel this pressure, because keeping the pressure high, keeping a sense of migration crisis alive is what continues to give them media attention and public votes. And I think we can conclude that the result is more and more securitization, deterrence measures, detention, and questionable deals with third countries to stop migration. And many of these examples, as every year, feature in the normalizing the extreme section of the MMR. At the same time, many so-called destination countries face labor shortages, severe labor shortages, and would need migrants to keep their economies going, let alone growing. And of course, we do see initiatives to expand legal pathways, including some promising initiatives like the Safe Mobility offices in the Americas. And as always, also to provide the necessary balance, the Mixed Migration Review also includes a section with promising examples, which we call Resisting the Extreme. But overall, we continue to see in too many contexts irrational, ineffective, and inhumane migration policies, despite so much available evidence and knowledge. And the big question remains why, despite so much available knowledge and evidence on migration, so little of it finds its way into policy. And I think the answer to that question probably brings us back to the overarching theme of the Mixed Migration Review. It's the politics. But that, of course, forces us, many of us in this room, to think and to think really hard about what we can do better or do more of to help redirect or reframe the political discussions on migration. And for the Mixed Migration Center, trying to reframe migration discussions is exactly what the Mixed Migration Review and the discussion during today's event is all about. And it's very much needed, we feel. We're living in very uncertain times with major crises all over the world, some severely forgotten actually, where millions of people are displaced, on the move, or actually trapped in conflict and life-threatening situations. And there's even more uncertainty right around the corner with the election of Donald Trump. What will happen in Ukraine? Will we see some kind of uncomfortable peace deal and the return of millions of Ukrainians? And by the way, what would be the labor market consequences of that in Europe, with many of those Ukrainians actually working and filling increasingly hard to fill vacancies? Or will the war even further escalate, driving even more Ukrainians out? What will happen in the Middle East with Gaza, Lebanon, Israel, Iran? And what might be the migration and displacement consequences of this? What will be the consequences of a trade war that Trump might cause, knowing that the cost of living is already a major concern for so many people, and that there are politicians out there who blame issues such as the cost of living or the lack of affordable housing on migration, actually, and on migrants, which is further fueling anti-migration sentiments. So all this means we need to think ahead, we need to reflect and be prepared for multiple future scenarios. And it seems that the politics in many countries that we operate in, that we live in, may stand in the way of this kind of rational reflection that we need so much. And we as MMC, including through a report like the Mixed Migration Review, really hope to contribute a little bit to that reflection. We don't have all the answers, of course, but we do have a lot of the necessary evidence. And one prime example of this evidence is the data from our 4MI program. And in this year's Mixed Migration Review, we are using data from 60,000 surveys we have done with migrants on the move all over the world to challenge some of the persistent migration misconceptions that are commonly found in media and political discourse. For example, around the role of smugglers in migration decisions or the perceived pull factor of generous asylum systems. To end, so what else is in the report this year? As always, the report describes all the key migration developments from the past year by region. We have stories from individual migrants reflecting on migration politics and policies. We have in-depth interviews with a wide range of thought leaders and practitioners. We have the 5 prize-winning essays from young writers based in and from the Global South. And then we have 6 in-depth essays all around the politics. So there's one on elections and the politics of migration, one on instrumentalization of migration and populism. We have an essay on democratic innovation and local migration governance as a potential way to depoliticize migration. We have an essay on migration narratives. We have one on the mismatch between the economic and labor market needs on the one hand, and then people's electoral choices related to migration on the other hand. And then finally, an essay on migration perceptions, opinion polls, and actual voting behavior. In short, there's a lot to dive into in these 280 pages. Now, how does this all relate to the panel discussion today? That is what Roberto is going to tell you. So back to you, Roberto, to introduce and start the panel discussion. And to the audience, please do enjoy reading this report, and please join us in the discussions today, including in the Q&A. Thank you very much, and back to you, Roberto.
Yes, thank you, Bram and Rafaela. So indeed, we now start the panel. We call the panel "The Politics of Migration, Shaping Perception, Policy and Real-Life Consequences." And the panel discussion will indeed touch upon 4 key issues that run through the review and have already been alluded to by Bram. First of all, migration narrative and the role of evidence in shaping and shifting migration narratives and politics. Secondly, the role of media in influencing migration narrative and policy as well. Third, whether local, city-level migration governance and democratic innovation at local level can be a recipe against populism and sort of politicization of migration issues. And finally, and very importantly, what are the real-life consequences of the often rather toxic migration debate and politics on the life of refugees and migrants? We don't want to leave this conversation as a conceptual one and an abstract one, because we know that has very real consequences, and we think is important. So to engage with this topic, I'm very happy to introduce our 4 panelists. So we have Andrew Geddes. Andrew is Professor of Migration Studies at and Director of the Migration Policy Center at the European University Institute in Fiesole. During his career, he worked with a wide range of academic and non-academic partners, which I think is added value for the role in this panel. And he's currently coordinating a youth-funded Horizon project aiming at building stronger relationship between migration research, policy, and practices. So it's bread and butter, let's say. Then we have Daniela Mohor. Daniela served as Latin America and Caribbean editor at large at the New Humanitarian, and has contributed to various US and Latin American media outlets. She focused on international relationships, social issues, human rights, and of course, migration. And she's also a writer, and she co-authored the non-fiction book La Búsqueda in Chile. So welcome, Daniela. Then we have Francisco Javier Boqueza Abia. Francisco is a councillor delegate for citizen participation and foreign cooperation in Fuenlabrada, which is a municipality in Spain. He's a member of the local committee of the Spanish Socialist Worker Party. He also served as president of the Bubi Sociocultural Association. is a member of the LGBT organization Fuela Entiende. And she also worked in the past in the private sector. So welcome to you as well. And last but not least, Sophie Beau. Sophie is the co-founder and general director of SOS Méditerranée. She serves as general manager of the French branch of the network, and she has over 25 years of experience in humanitarian and social program. So welcome to you as well. So let's start with you, Andrew. So the first, we touch upon policy and research connection, if you like. So how do research and policy interact when it comes to migration, and what role can academic insight play in shifting migration narrative toward evidence-based approach? You have been interviewed for the Mixed Migration Review. You are in the report, and already in there you have started answering in part this question. So if you can help us starting with this, and if you can also share some concrete example, if you have, based on your current and past work, about things that have worked. And you have 4 minutes for all this, which I think is going to be interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto, and thanks very much for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to be here. The MMR, the review, is a goldmine of evidence, insight, and analysis. So I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to read it. And so what I'm going to talk about very briefly in my 4 minutes is connecting research, evidence, and policymaking in what is at times a very highly politicized field with many voices. And the evidence, research evidence, can at times be just one voice in a very noisy room. We also know that research evidence is produced by many organizations, so it's not just academic research. So I think we think more broadly about organizations that produce evidence and try and inform debate through that evidence. And of course, it's a three-way relationship, because there are those who produce the evidence, there are the decision makers, and of course there is the public, the citizens, addressed both through research and also as a result of the decisions that are made. And I just wanted very quickly just to pick out what I think could be 3 relevant questions. First, which I call a paradox of evidence. The second is this point about changing narratives. And the third, just some thinking about examples of impact, but also being realistic about what impact might mean. So the first point I wanted to make is what I call the paradox of evidence, because I don't think and I think Bram Frau's referred to this, I don't think we've ever had more evidence about migration. Just as one example of that, the EU since 2015 has funded 56 large-scale projects on migration. And there are very many other projects too. There is a wealth of evidence and information, but I think at the same time there's a sense that this is having limited impact, or less impact than you would have thought such an impressive knowledge base would have on decision making. But I would say that there is also significant variation. So I think at local or community level, we may see more impact. Some issues also are less politicized, less controversial for others than others are. And it's also, I think, it's important to think about what can be achieved, whether the aim of evidence is to change policy, or whether the aim of research evidence is to kind of increase the engagement with evidence. And these are not the same thing. I think the paradox of evidence can be exacerbated if the idea is that research evidence should shape or drive policy, because I don't think that's realistic. The evidence base is rarely so conclusive, and why should researchers have such a privileged position? So I think we need to think about what role evidence should play, but that doesn't downplay its importance, but we think about the role of evidence. Excuse me. The second question I wanted to focus on is the point Roberto made about narratives, and particularly the role of evidence and research. I'm sorry, excuse me. Evidence research can play in shifting narratives. And obviously, if you're thinking about shifting narratives, you're perhaps also thinking about changing people's views and beliefs about migration and migration policies. And I think this is extremely difficult, because changing people's beliefs at a fundamental level is rather difficult. Narratives can shift. And we know that, but we know that evidence and information can be contested. And we also know that we live in a world of what are sometimes called alternative facts. So this makes, in my view, even stronger the need for robust evidence. But to do what? And so I would suggest that a key role for those who are producing evidence is to kind of build capacity around engagement, to incentivize engagement and to increase the uptake of evidence, while recognizing that research evidence is one voice in a noisy room. So I think for researchers, it means thinking about how to engage. And if we are then thinking about changing the narrative, I think it's very important that any sense of how that can be done must be grounded in a realistic understanding of people's beliefs and values. And thirdly, on the examples, well, I think the MMR report provides many examples, but also demonstrates the limits that evidence can have. And I think there are many examples, for instance, of projects at local level looking at issues around integration, linguistic acquisition, where you can see impacts of policies. Some areas are more highly politicized, such as, say, asylum, which are very difficult for research to have impact. But what I would say is that this brings us back to where I started, essentially, that decision makers are open, I think, to evidence in some policy areas more than others. They will be influenced by their perceptions or misperceptions of where the public stand. And so this, I think, leads to a relationship between research and evidence, which is not only between researchers and decision makers, but between researchers, decision makers, and citizens, with scope for misperception and miscommunication in that relationship. So thanks. That's my just over 4 minutes. Sorry about that. But back to you, Roberto.
No, thanks. It is fantastic because you also made a perfect bridge to the next panelist, because you end up speaking about the importance of the link between politics, politician, and what is the perception of the public opinion. And I think that that's take us to the role that media can and could play in this equation that exists between politician, citizen, and voter society. So in the foreword of the MMR, Bram mentioned a quote from an Austrian writer, which I'd like to mention here. I'm sure you haven't had time to read it yet. Who already a century ago said that politicians lie to journalists and then believe this lie when they see them in print. I think is very black and white, but I think is interesting as a reflection of the world we live in today, and highlight very well the role of media in the era of migration narrative and migration politics. So linked to this, Daniela, how does migration coverage influence and is influenced by migration perception and policies? And then if you can perhaps link this especially to the context in Latin America that you are more familiar with, and link to this specific context, do you see any difference in how migration is covered in Latin America versus how it is covered in the Western media, and with which impact? So floor is yours, 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto, and hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me on behalf of the New Humanitarian to participate to this interesting panel. And congratulations on the report, which I went through and is very complete and interesting. So coming back to the quote you mentioned, Roberto, I think, I mean, it's a complicated issue, measuring the impact of media in the perceptions of migration is more complex than ever. I mean, the changes in migration dynamics in Latin America in the past few years have had a significant impact on the perception of migrants and in the narrative surrounding the phenomenon. So the question on the table is often, have the media been fueling xenophobia or helped consolidate a political discourse centered on the need of deterrence policies more than on integration? Or is it that politicians use migrant as a political tool and feed the media with information or viewpoints that are in service of their political goal? I think it's probably a little bit of both, and we don't know which one comes first. but there is a common element in both, and that is the use of fear. In Latin America, the rise of organized crime and insecurity has become the #1 concern of citizens. And in that context, fear is a powerful tool both for politicians to gain popularity and for media not afraid of sensationalism to sell. So migrants are used by both as a tool to instill fear, I think. When we look at the narratives in media about migration, it is almost automatically associated to the rise of insecurity. Several reports have shown that most news are clearly relating the arrival of more migrants to the rise of crime. And many news are now mentioning the Venezuelan mega gang called the Tren de Aragua, which has been expanding across the continent. So in Chile, for instance, where I live, when there is a piece of news about a killing or car robbery or whatever crime, stories usually even specify the nationality of the person arrested or charged, which I found odd at the beginning, because I don't know if that changes the gravity of the severity of the crime or not. So that's one of the thing. And if we look at some polls that I went through, for instance, on social media, the xenophobic tweets when we talk in conversations about security and employment and migration, I mean, migration related to security and employment, xenophobic tweets outnumber by far the positive ones. And so this is one part of the issue. Now, I would like to go back to the politicians' responsibility and their relationship with media, because we have seen a rise of populist leaders and even xenophobic leaders in the region. And when we have statements by leaders such as Dina Boluarte or Trump in the US, Dina Boluarte in Peru and Trump in the US, who have systematically linked migration to criminality, it is relayed in the media who cover it, and it becomes a more accepted narrative. So media have contributed to the deterioration of the perception of migrants, both by using them for sensationalistic purposes, and they have also been used by politicians to disseminate biased information, or partial information at least. And what is worrisome is that in this narrative, there is no space for information on how migrants themselves are preyed upon by criminal groups, or the fact that statistics show that the proportion of migrants involved in organized crime is much inferior to the average of number of all citizens involved in crime. And there is no space either for in-depth reports on the factor pushing people to migrate, no information on the humanity of migrants, nor on their contribution to host countries' economy. And I think that there is room for media to work on shifting the narratives and direct the attention where it should be, which means looking at the policies that are making the situation of migrants more precarious and contributing to push them in the hands of organized crime. The second issue I wanted to talk about is the kind of media we are mentioning, because there is a distinction between traditional media and social media. And Latin America is one of the world's most unequal region. And in that context, news consumption is unequal too. I mean, Latin America has a huge social media market. I think it's more than 3 million users in South America alone. And we all know that the boom of TikTok, Instagram, X, and others have allowed all kinds of information and misinformation and disinformation to circulate. So there is no fact-checking, no impartiality. All rules of traditional ethical journalism are off the table, and extreme voices are amplified. I mean, I've seen, and probably you all have seen viral videos of migrants stealing or criticizing their host countries or verbally abusing someone, and that is completely tweeted and retweeted, and it becomes something kind of out. And there is an interesting report on xenophobia led by the Universidad Nacional de San Martín, which is an Argentinian university. It's a bit old, it's from 2021, but we have seen that the trend has increased since. And in this report, 29% of those polled were in favor of forbidding entry to all immigrants. And the largest proportion of anti-migration sentiment was found among the centennials, that is young people between 16 and 24 years old, and who happen actually to also be the main users of social media.
Daniela,
So,
can I ask you to try to wrap up, and then we are going to reopen for a second round. So perhaps you can add more in the second round.
Sure, of course. So I just wanted to say, to finish, that that in this unequal context, it's important for media to take the responsibility of reaching all segments of the population and inform them with reliable information, and not leave that to more Western global news outlets that are only read by an elite in Latin America.
Okay, no, thank you, because you give us a good picture, and then not wanting to summarize and not trying, but a situation whereby several factors seems to be contributing to a sort of spectacularization and problematization of migration, linked to what make a news, what doesn't, and also the role of social media. And again, thank you, because also in this case is a perfect link to the next panelist, which is Francisco. And in the area of public perception and local governance, because so against this background of quite high politicization of migration issues, which also sort of fed by the role that media and social media, certain part of them plays. So how can sort of local authority react? So how do migration politics and policy at the national level, international level, and the narrative influence the public opinion and the local governance? And what strategy has your municipality employed to address misperception about migration and improve integration, particularly in the face of this very politicized and polarized migration debate that we just mentioned? You were interviewed in the memoir essay on the role that city can play, and you have mentioned already the importance of not labeling policy discussion as migration specific. Perhaps you can build upon this, Francisco, now or later. So, Francisco, the floor is yours. We cannot see you, and you are muted, Francisco. So we can perhaps switch to Sophie, waiting for Francisco to come back. Francisco is calling us from an hotel in South Africa. So something might have happened there. But Sophie is with us, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm here.
Okay, good. So we can move to you, Sophie, and then hear from Francesco when he's back. So as I mentioned earlier, we really don't want to do the mistake of thinking that this is a discussion over a principle, concept, ideas, and opinion. What we are discussing eventually have a very important real-life consequences. And that's what we like to hear from you, because you have experience. So based on your work with SOS Méditerranée, how have migration politics shaped condition for migrants, particularly those undertaking the dangerous sea journey that you encounter on your day-to-day work? And then if you can elaborate also on how do concretely politically motivated migration policy impact humanitarian actors, and what policy change you would advocate for to improve the situation. Thank you, Sophie. 4 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your invitation. And I think it's really important to have this dialogue between field actors and researchers and policymakers. So thank you for the initiative, and thank you for giving a voice for the people being rescued at sea in particular. So as a worker of SOS Méditerranée, just very quickly, where am I speaking from? SOS Méditerranée is the European Sea Rescue Association. We were founded in 2015 because of the failure of the states around the Mediterranean Sea to rescue people in distress at sea, despite the fact that there is a crystal clear legal obligation under the law of the sea to rescue any person in distress at sea. So I would like to recall first that in the last 10 years, according to the International Organization for Migration, at least 31,000 people have died in the Mediterranean due to numerous shipwrecks. And this is unfortunately underestimated because the International Organization for Migration can only count people that are found. And we know that there are many invisible shipwrecks as well. So we are facing the biggest humanitarian tragedy at sea that we've ever known and faced. And it's still an ongoing one, which is very shocking as well. From this area of the Mediterranean, 80% of the deaths happen in the central Mediterranean, which is this corridor between Libya, Tunisia, and Italy, where you have a very a lot of distance to go for these tiny ships, and they never make the journey, or rarely make the journey until their destination. So we are a maritime and humanitarian association founded by the civil society in order to save lives, to protect them until they disembark in a safe place, and to be a witness. So what have we witnessed over these 8 years in the central Mediterranean? Through 430 rescue operations and more than 41,000 people that have been rescued and gave us their testimonies. First of all, to summarize, because we don't have much time, I would say a very important denial of responsibility by coastal states to rescue people at sea and bring them in a place of safety, which constitutes a very clear breach of international maritime and humanitarian law. Would like to underline that there is not a single state maritime asset anymore since April 2019 in the Mediterranean for the rescue of people at sea. The second point is a clear deterioration and ongoing deterioration of the coordination of rescues, since this responsibility, which was held by Italy for a long period of time, was handed over to Libya in the biggest distress area. Although we know that Libya is a failed state where human trafficking and unprecedented levels of violence against migrants are flourishing, which feeds the migratory flow. Finally, what we see in the Mediterranean is that states are trying to erase the unconditional duty to assist enshrined in the law of the sea, in a general movement where the lives of thousands of migrants are politically instrumentalized. And I would say that they have been creating, these states surrounding the Mediterranean, a lethal deterrence policy. So to answer to your second question on what is the impact of these policies on humanitarian actors, we have been facing as search and rescue actors, not only SOS Méditerranée, many other NGOs as well, different search and rescue NGOs from the civil society, many attacks which aim to hinder our ability to rescue people in distress at sea. The ships we are operating are submitted to judicial and administrative harassment, leading very often to their detention and to big fines that we need to pay. There is a clear denial to designate port of safety according to maritime law. This is clearly something that is enshrined in maritime law, but states are not with difficulties respecting this obligation. For instance, at the moment, since 2 years, Italy is operating a distant port policy, which aims at diverting our ships from the area of operation and having us transiting towards very distant ports, which blocks the capacity of rescue of our ships during this transit days of navigation. The consequence is that the search and rescue area is emptied from the few civil rescue ships. So we really lack a capacity, and the consequence is the death of people. There is also a scapegoat narrative that is used very actively by certain European states. NGOs are accused to provoke a grand remplacement. This is a French theory, the great replacement of the European population by Arab and African populations. We are facing smear campaigns on rescue organization and even sometimes physical attacks like we faced in the SOS Méditerranée headquarters in France in 2018. I would say that the policies that could be led is, of course, to reaffirm facts and evidences. And this is why, for us, it's so important to bear witness of the situation and give the voice to the people who are rescued as well, to counter spreading this fake news. Of course, reaffirming the superiority of international law and the national legislations that are illegitimate, like, for instance, the Piantedosi decree, which is now used in Italy against the duty to assist, which is overarching international obligation. There is a need to protect the search and rescue actors from these attempts to criminalize them. But for that, more generally, the last point I would like to say is that there is a critical need to recognize high seas as a humanitarian space, because humanity is denied at sea at the moment. And we need to recognize high sea as a humanitarian space, whereas this duty to assist enshrined in maritime law is paramount.
Yeah, so thank you, Sophie. I think you provide a very concrete example of how a certain approach to migration management is impacting on search and rescue and the impact that this has on capacity to rescue people at sea indeed. So thank you for that. I think that Francisco is back with us. And so we are coming back to you, Francisco. Sorry for the problem you had. So we were asking you the question after Daniela depict a picture whereby we see a sort of trend that goes toward problematization, spectacularization of migration issues, also in the context of media discourse and social media discourse particularly. So the question to you is how this impact and influence public opinion and local governance, and then concretely in your experience, if you can mention something about strategies that your municipality has employed to address new perception about migration and improve integration, particularly in the face of this politicized migration debate. I said that you already started giving some example in the essay of the MMR on the role of cities, for which you have been interviewed. So can you tell us more? And you have 4 minutes, Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apparently, the internet has decided that at the moment to speak is when it stop working. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much for your reports. It's been absolutely brilliant. I think we need real data and reality in this world of politicization of social issues, and in this world of disinformation and misinformation, as my colleagues mentioned earlier. Well, it is a world of politicization of migration, and it does have impact on a local level. And the migration is a sociological reality. I'm talking about the migration that is being politicized as at the moment. It's a sociological reality, and it comes, it's the consequence of the impossibility of people to develop a life project in their countries, right? So since internationally, the conflicts that are around the world and the foreign relationships that are based on zero-sum games and unequal commercial relations are responsible actually for what is happening. So people cannot live in their life. They must try to, in the country, they must try to find a way. And I think this humanitarian and economic migration has something to do with the foreign politics. And instead of politicized migration, we have to link it to human rights. I think that would be the right way to do it. And the local impact that it has, and it does have it, even in countries and regions that have worked on prevention, the local, because we are not islands, we are not isolated, and we are part of this world, is obviously putting the people that are success, that can be targeted and they are vulnerable at the forefront to be targeted, right? And these fake news and rumors against migrants create fear on local population, and which then create anger and eventually rejection of migrants from majorities. And this vicious cycle goes on and on. So I think when there is the media willing to do so, and there is these political parties that fuel and this discourse, and they get into, again, a vicious cycle, we have to look at what is causing that and what is allowing these both parties, these both stakeholders to be able to do so. And there is no accountability for politicians having these messages, because migrant population, despite and people that are residents, despite of being paying taxes, cannot vote, and they have no voting rights, and they have no political impact, right? So what we can do if they have no voting rights, because that is something that is out of our scope, well, we have to bring them into the table. We have to make them a part of the political discourse, and allowing them to be part of the policy making in this co-governance and co-creation and co-design of public policy, right? So we can, look for a solution for this issue, but the problem is that we need political will. We need that the politicians that are on a local level in charge of creating these spaces so that civic society can participate, are willing to give the migrants that voice. And as soon as these migrants, these people, these citizens, these neighbors get a voice, well, they will feel part of the society, and then they will develop a sense of belonging. They are not gonna exclude themselves. They are gonna feel wanted. They are gonna feel part of this, discourse and of this neighborhood and of this city. And straight away, it's going to have consequences if there is discourses against them, right? So that is the way, I think, there is this way. It's a problem that, it depends on the political will. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you. I was saying thank you. I'm managing to do this for the twice already as a moderator. Congratulations to me. So thank you. Obviously, very interesting to hear someone working at the municipal level, and for sharing your reflection, which I think resonate quite well with what has been said by other panelists before you. So I can see that we start seeing question coming in the question answer, which is good. So please do keep sending your question. I think that we start answering some of it in writing, but we definitely ask panelists to address the other. But before that, I want first of all to open for the panelists, if they want to do so, to quickly respond to each other about what you said, for the purpose of making this as much as possible a conversation. And then I also want to pose another question that is a bit, could we also almost see as a bit of the overarching research question of the mixed migration review this year, which you alluded to already, Francisco. You seem to already have expressed your opinion in a way on this matter. So the question is the public really negative and concerned about migration, and politicians are simply responding to those genuine sentiments, genuine concern, or are certain politicians actively fueling negative feeling, sometimes with the support of some media at least, and then reaping the electoral gain by keeping migration challenges high in the agenda? We call it the chicken and egg question. So what comes first, societal concern or politicization? So I open the floor now for you to start responding to each other, and then if you can also try to answer the chicken egg. I'll be even stricter than before, so literally a couple of minutes each max, because then we want to move to start answering and interacting with the audience. So the floor is open for whoever wants to go. Francisco.
Yes, I mean, since I just finished and then I can link, I am sure that there is this media, it all starts with media teasing the environment and media teasing the floor, right? If it gets a reaction, then they start like, well, reacting and putting more and more and more content, trying to, well, depict a certain reality of the migrants that is going to put out the stereotypes. So the media starts, and then the politicians jump in straight away, because they see that there is room for that, and then the people start to panic, right? So, and then the cycle starts. Obviously, there is not one single migrant that is exactly what is represented. There is so many migrant realities. That's why it's so important, the report and all the information you provide with your report, giving voices to different realities. But there is only one reality in the media, and there is only one reality in these extreme messages in the right. So in the far right, in this case. So it starts with them, and then the concern is passed by media and far right politicians. Yes, and then there is.
I think I can, if you allow me to stop you there, because you actually answer very directly to the question. So I'd like to perhaps open, I can, I'm not surprised to see that Daniela want to answer to that.
Yes.
So go ahead, and again, we really want to make it a conversation, so try to be brief and concise, because I think that also the other two panelists want to add something.
Sure, I just think that it's a very tricky question, and I'm not able to say what comes first, but in defense of media, I would say that they find fertile ground as well because of failure of governments to develop proper integration policy. So when you're a low-income family living in a poor neighborhood in Latin America and you see this flow of migrants coming in without any policy destined to properly integrate them, the impact is going to be for them mostly. I mean, not only for migrants, but also for vulnerable populations in Latin America. So there is a political responsibility to make communities more able to integrate migrants, and that would make people less xenophobic as well. I mean, it would help see migrants, give them a voice, as you mentioned, is important locally. But if we didn't have that issue, maybe media would also, I mean, they're responsible of showing only one side of the problem and promoting a negative narrative, but they have fertile ground to do it. And not all media are lucky as we are at the New Humanitarian, who, I mean, we have we're writing for the aid sector. We don't have to pay so much attention on what local readers or the audience, the local audience is looking for.
Yeah, no, thanks for making also this distinction. I think is important. And I think, yes, by calling you to represent journalists, we're missing the perspective of someone that might be more constrained. Sophie, and thank you, Daniela. Sophie.
Yes, it was very well described. There is a instrumentalization of fear, and we can feel it a lot in our field. And a political instrumentalization done, which fuels the negative feelings of the public opinion. It is working. It has highly polarized the public opinion in the last years. But I would like also maybe to give another tone and another feedback, which is a less negative one. There is also the other part of the public opinion, which is supporting the solidarity workers in the field and very active. There is real chain of solidarity everywhere that is working still. So just to give you the example of SOS Méditerranée, if we are here today still after 9 years of existence, it's just because the civil society has mobilized to give us the means to be there. We still have hundreds of new volunteers joining the association, despite the fact that Mediterranean has disappeared from the media since the Ukrainian war and the Middle East war have taken all the space. So despite all these difficulties and despite this polarized approach, I think there is also an opportunity to foster these energies and to work better in the coalitions, I think, with these people of the civil society that want to do something and are not indifferent and see the danger of this polarization.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Interesting. Andrew, do you want to also come in? And then I suggest we start addressing a question that the audience is posing through the question and answer, which there are some quite particularly interesting.
Yeah, just speak about this chicken. I don't think it is a chicken and egg question, really, to be honest. I think that what comes first is the underlying causes of people's attitudes to migration. Our attitudes to all social and political issues are formed relatively early in life, very influenced by our early life experiences, particularly education. Education, which can be a key driver of people's attitudes to social and political issues. So I think what you have is members of society who are likely very different attitudes to key social and political issues, different values, different beliefs. There's quite a wide distribution. Some people are very opposed to immigration, some people are very in favor of immigration. Many people who perhaps have uncertain views, inconsistent views about migration, feel uncertain and confused about the issues, think that it's complex, might be concerned about it, might have fear about it, might feel threatened by it, might see the opportunities of it. then the media, I think, plays a role, and the key role of the media is in relation to issue salience. If we want to understand the dynamics of public attitudes in Europe to migration, and also globally, issue salience is a key factor, the level of public attention, because the level of public attention plays a key role in activating populations that have concern about migration, whether they're in favor or whether they're against. So I think that, you know, the key thing is many people's beliefs and values are actually quite stable, quite resistant to change, formed early in life. And one of the key issues is how they're activated by political activists of the left, obviously of the right. And I think one of the key problems would be to say to people that your concerns are not valid, that your concerns are misinformed, that you are ignorant. Now, it could be the evidence contradicts exactly their opinions, but I think it's quite a risky strategy to tell people that their concerns are not valid, legitimate. And I think that can be one reason why populist parties have success, because they're able to exploit people's sense that they're not being listened to. And that could be for wider issues linked to their own exclusion from the labour market, their own inability to access public services, what we see as a fair basis. But yeah, so I would emphasise the role of salience in activating people's attitudes to migration, and the media can play a part in that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. No, I do think. I do recommend people that are interested in this to read the interview with Andrew in the MMR. Touch upon all this. I think is very interesting and eloquent. So I'll not speak too much, as I promised to my colleagues, against my inner nature. And instead, I will start asking questions based on what the audience has put in the question and answer. So let me go to that. We have a few questions. I'm not going by order. I'm just picking some and then leaving others for later, because I think they're more appropriate for later on in the conversation. So there is a question from Amish, which is: at present, it appears that the private military lobby and private prison operator are lobbying heavily for security-led solution. Mention the example of Frontex border externalization, the ICE deportation plan, Rwanda deal, and so on. And are quite successful, and then much more effective in framing and shaping public policy choices in the views of the person asking. So the question is, how can advocate for more humane and sustainable policy approach lobby more effectively to shift immigration policy priority? You might have an opinion on the lobbying part, Andrew, but also others. Of course, Andrew is responding from
no, I think colleagues on the panel would know better than me, so I'm sure I'm very grateful to hear their perspectives.
So anyone want to go on this question? How we can as a counter the lobby of those that they call for securitization toward a more human approach? It's not an easy question. Then Andrew?
Well, very quickly, I mean, it's just because I think campaigning and how you develop a kind of strategic approach to campaign is really important. There's a huge amount of expertise, and I suspect many of the people in the audience for this seminar have got a lot of expertise in how you build effective campaigns, knowing your audience, understanding your audience, understanding how you can target information which might express through narrative accounts of individual lives, a bit like the report we're discussing today does, the review. But I think that it's not a question of kind of overarching strategy. It's a question often of quite focused, targeted interventions, maybe targeted particular population groups and things like that. And so I think there are plenty of examples of campaigns which try to challenge this securitization, militarization narrative. It's hugely important work. And I think that there's a lot to be learned, and just a small plug for my own organization here at EUI. We've created a migration campaigns database with over 300 information campaigns on migration, which people can look at and also understand more about what those campaigns are trying to do in terms of what they're trying to target and how effective they are in doing that. So if you look at the website, the Migration Policy Center at EUI, you can access large numbers of information campaigns about migration.
Thanks. Other panelists are welcome to come in if they want. Otherwise, we can move to another question, always from Ashim, which in my view, it can be also linked to what we are discussing. But first, do anyone want to go? Okay, then let me move.
Sophie wants to go, Roberto.
Yes, okay. You are allowed to join the panel, Bram, but your camera is off, so you might want to put it on.
Oh, I saw Sophie raising her actual hand, not a virtual hand, but an actual hand on the screen. So I think she wants to come in on the previous question. So.
Okay, sorry.
It's not maybe just to develop a little bit, but with the very narrow example of the Central Mediterranean and the role of Frontex that has been mentioned before. I think we have really to make the point as humanitarian organizations that despite policies, migration policies, and despite the role of agencies like Frontex, which have another mandate, which is the protection of borders, we need to make the point of protecting the space of humanitarian rights and next to the migration policies, and not making it contradictory. Can have a border protection policy, and you can ensure the duty to assist people in danger of death at sea. It is not contradictory. What is missing again is maybe this preliminary step, which is the recognition of the sea as a humanitarian space. Denied at the moment. From this denial, there is no recognition of humanitarian crisis. There are no assets. There are no humanitarian response programs from the UN. No funds to help actors to respond to this situation. So it has been possible in the past. There was a Mare Nostrum state-led operation, rescue operation, and while there was also actions to protect the borders. This is again not a contradictory thing, and I think we really must make that point to have people recognize this humanitarian space. For me, it's really missing here. And it's very easy then to answer to anyone. For instance, Italy got that answer from the European Union in 2014 when they led this operation Mare Nostrum in the Central Mediterranean. They were accused of provoking a push factor and a pull factor, sorry. And so that we had this narrative that was flourishing and that was not countered by European states. To counter that, we really need to protect this. We need coalitions to go and raise their voices, and at least for humanitarian actors, also UN agencies. We are trying to get that point. I'm talking again, sorry for that. My window is very restricted to the maritime migrations.
No, but thank you, because what I'm also hearing from you, which is very welcome, and I think that SMMC Center, SMMC Migration Center, we very much relate, is this need of going beyond binary thinking, as if one solution to a problem or one approach automatically exclude the other. So the importance of not pitching necessarily state security and humanitarian principle can and should coexist. And you are perfectly right in that. So I think it's very important reminder for all of us. So thank you for that. I would suggest to then move to the question that I was referring to earlier, which is for Francisco. So the question is, can you share how the city of Fuenlabrada concretely gives voice to migrants alongside their fellow member of community? For example, what are the institutional mechanisms you have in place that allows it? And how has that helped you from the local administration? I think that is linked to the conversation we are having, because potentially one can argue that give voice to people is a very effective way of promoting a different narrative and encountering the predominant one. So Francisco.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. Thank you very much, Roberto. Fuenlabrada basically is cultural. This comes down to a response, to an answer, that is that Fuenlabrada's cultural diversity management has evolved dynamically. And we are very lucky. I think we are considered a best practice around the world, I would say. It is a bit, it can seem pretentious, but it is indeed. And it is because out of the three models that are known, which is assimilationism, multiculturality, or interculturality, we started, well, until now, we thought we were pushing for interculturality. And this has a strong vinculation with the city's story with associations and grassroots organizations. So having this, the local government has had for the past 40 plus years a strong relationship with the associations and mechanism to foster and to promote civic participation in policy making. We started as a city of 3,000 people in the 60s, and we became a city of 140,000 in the 90s. So we didn't have infrastructure, we didn't have schools. So it was the associations pushing for the needs, and the local governments being smart enough to have them as the relevant voices, right? When migrants started to get to the city in the 90s onwards, the government wanted them to be part of what was happening in the city. So the government promoted them and pushed them so that they would create associations as well, and they did. So they were part of the debate. Then they created the Table for the Coexistence, which is a group of 30 plus, there are exactly 36 associations, which include migrant associations, regional houses, or neighborhood association, the Federation of Parents of Students, or the LGBT community altogether, creating a platform of associations, which its main aim is to promote interculturality, civic dialogue, and creating awareness and being part of all the decision-making strategic projects of the city. For example, the urban agenda, well, the Table for the Coexistence is there when we are discussing the urban agenda. Or when they are the plenary sessions in the districts, the Table for the Coexistence is there. Well, now we've realized, thanks to two European projects we have participated in, one of them is a project that is about citizen auditors for the municipal services. So these auditors would audit the municipal services to check whether there is a structural discrimination in these municipal services. And these auditors were part of the civil society, Table for the Coexistence, people from migrant background and non-migrant background all together. And then another European project based on participation of migrant descendants. We realized that they have a strong sense of belonging, and they perceive that the model of integration, of inclusion that we want to have is the cultural hybridization. So you see, this is beyond interculturality.
Yeah. So thank you. Let me stop you there. I mean, it's great. It's super interesting of you. In my view, that called the question why it's not happening elsewhere, right? Which I think is, is the other side of the coin, and it's probably even more important. But please do also refer to the essay in the MMR, which is exactly on this: how city can contribute to change a bit narrative and politics. And then if you have more questions for Francesco, you can write us. We'll put you in touch if Francesco allow us to do so. Now, we have other questions. Let me read one specific to Daniela, seems to me. Do you think censorship and control of mainstream media by the authority make the population look for alternative sources of information elsewhere? Which I think they're referring to is social media. In this age of social media, yeah, people tend to get raw information online before it is aired by mainstream media to be edited. I mean, you already alluded to this earlier, Daniela, but is there anything that you want to add in a couple of minutes? We have 10 minutes left and we want to continue discussing.
I think I kind of answered that that question. I think that even without censorship or control of media in Latin America, at least, and I imagine in other continents as well, it's easier for most people to access social media and to inform themselves on digital devices more than on, I don't know, national TV or anything. So I'm not sure that's a factor. I think it's already there. I mean, it's the pattern of media consumption has changed, and it depends a lot on generations as well. I mean, influencers and all this. I mean, if you look at the Darien Gap, for instance, a lot of young teenagers are crossing because they see influencers and they see that as an adventure. And I mean, we can teach how to discriminate information. I think that would work better probably than expecting something else. And we go back to what Andrew was saying about education and changing attitudes. And I mean, education is key in terms of helping people discriminating what they should pay attention to and what not, or put things into perspective.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I think that also linked to what Francisco was saying. So giving voice to people as much as possible as a way is also to have that feeding into shaping the narrative, the voices of people of migratory background. I think it's also interesting and important. So there is another question, very specific. So let me ask. Is there research specifically on the role of private lobbies on migration discourse? It can seem like a blind spot often on contentious issue. I think it's for you, Andrew. Or can you...
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Sorry, I can't...
Yeah, sorry. Is there research specifically on the role of private lobbies on migration discourses that you can refer our...
Well, I mean, yeah, there's research on, that's one of the issues. There's research on everything. But it's, then it can be difficult to know the whole research field, but one very influential lobby is the security industry. And so the security industry has got a strong stake in the securitized migration policies. Migration control is very big business, and that has been very well documented by scholars looking at the global, what I think has been referred to as kind of global migration industry, securitized, militarized, with the technologies of control, which are very expensive. But there are other lobbies as well. I mean, they're typically across in the country I live in Italy, I think the business lobby has been very active in arguing for increased labour migration and been quite successful, with a government that is very focused also on preventing asylum seekers getting to Italy. So you've got kind of mixed messages from a government as well, because the business lobby can be quite effective in pushing also for openings to labour migration. So I think that's a very good question, and the role of lobbies is it's important in any political system, and obviously in migration policy it's also important.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So there is research, is the short answer, and then perhaps, Andrew, you can point at some of that in the chat if you can. And we have covered this in previous edition of the Mixed Migration Review, Bram. So perhaps we can also put there a link or two to the essay in the past, and think that there people can also find a reference for further digging into this. Now we are 5 minutes to close, and then we have been keeping a question that was posed early on for now, because we think is a good way to wrap up and organize a quick tour with our panelists, if they all wish to do so. And the question is, what are the 3 top positive immigration policy changes the speaker would like to see happen in 25 in Europe? So whoever want to go, please go. The 3 migration policy changes you would like to see happening from your perspective. Yeah, Francisco?
Well, can I say 3 or shall I say 1? There is one that is,
I think you can start with 1.
Okay. No, it's 1 each. Okay, obviously. Oh, no, yes. There is this that is giving votes to every resident that is at least locally. So I'm paying taxes, and then I cannot decide who is going to rule. And then I am going to be a target of someone that is not going to have consequences about, I don't know, talking fake about me. So I think that it is something which is key. As soon as, at least on a local level, migrants, residents, people that are paying taxes can vote, then that is going to change their narrative.
Thank you. I think, obviously so, right? We're discussing migration politics, migration, democracy, election, so could not be more pertinent to the conversation. Thank you. Does anyone want to go in the room, panelists, about what they would call for in terms of policy changes in 25?
Yes, I can. Well, I mentioned the one that I really think is the bigger one, which is to adopt a framework. Again, I'm sorry, I'm restricted to the analysis of humanitarian operations at sea, but to adopt a framework to recognize the humanitarian space at sea is really what we are missing today, and from that, all the bad effects that I described earlier. So I think that's really the main topic. And the second one, which I have not mentioned, I would like to say, is a policy change to stop feeding the vicious circle of human trafficking in Libya by transferring thousands by different channels, but really very high level of money to Libya from the European Union, which are supporting and feeding this human trafficking in Libya through the so-called Libyan Coast Guard. So that's really something we have not had time to develop, but I would really like to mention.
Thank you. Again, both points very clear and loud. And coming from
could I, because it follows on from what Sophie said.
Please go.
If I picked out 2, I think it would be mainstream human rights in the EU external agreements and open to proper scrutiny around human rights protections, the EU's agreement with third countries. I think that's really important. And I would suggest that EU member states stop wasting huge amounts of money on offshoring and external processing, and commit what will probably be more effective resources to proper management of asylum and taking responsibility, rather than these fantasy island approaches that are extremely expensive and damaging.
Thank you. Daniela, if you want, I can give you 30 seconds. Otherwise, we can wrap up. We still have quite a few participants, but it's time. So Daniela, 30 seconds, or I give the floor to Bram.
Since it's centered in Europe, I will pass for this one.
Okay, thank you. So Bram, you have the easy task of wrapping up and close. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Roberto. Easy task indeed. I'm not going to summarize, of course, everything that was said, but let me start with a big thank you to the panelists for a great and really interesting discussion. Also to the audience. We still have about 100 people in the room, so people are staying for this discussion. So I think they're interested. We probably could have continued for many hours, but thanks also to the audience for lots of questions. As always, during these launch events, we try to do our best to answer as many as possible. Sorry if we didn't manage to answer your question in full, but always feel free to ask us later, get in touch with us directly. There will be a link to a post-event survey, so I would also like to ask you all to complete the survey. We will also send an email with a link to the survey to everybody who registered. And do sign up to our mailing list as well. There's a link in the chat if you want to stay informed of everything we do. Going back to the discussion, I like what you said earlier, Andrew. There's research on everything. You're probably right. As always, during the discussion, I also start thinking about the topic for next year's MMR. So I'll usually try to stop that thinking until after Christmas or in the new year. But it always starts, and I think that's great about these launch events. It fuels further thinking about what we can do next year, what we should do. What I also take from the discussion is that there's a lot of reasons, I think, to be concerned about what we're seeing around us in terms of migration policy development and the ways migrants are being treated all over the world. And we should point that out. I think at the same time, we should also try to look at the positives and the good examples that are out there. And there are many as well. We've heard about some of the initiatives at the local level that we can learn a lot from. I mentioned it earlier in the chat today, a country like Spain, which is currently taking a bit of a different approach in their narratives, in their migration policies around regularization, clearly stressing the need for migration. OECD is also pointing out how Spain's economy is actually growing due to migration. So I think we can take examples there. The Biden administration, well, on the one hand, actually having been pretty tough on trying to stop irregular migration. At the same time, there's also massively expanded legal pathways for protection, but also for other purposes into the United States. For example, the Safe Mobility Offices or the community sponsorship programs. Canadian government has always been doing interesting things. So there are good examples out there that we can learn from. As well, and linking to some of the questions that came up today, what are the kind of arguments that we can use to shift the debate? I think it's important to realize. I mean, there's part of our population that we're probably not going to convince anyway. They might keep on voting for the far right. They might even be racist. There's no way, in a way, give it up. You're not going to convince them. There's also part of the population that is already convinced, probably, about the need for empathy and a humanitarian approach. I think most of the people in many of our countries are somewhere in the middle. They're relatively moderate. They accept that migration is not something to be against or be in favor of. It's simply there. But I think what most people want is that migration is properly managed and controlled, and see the benefits of migration. And there are many, and there's needs for migrants in many of our economies. And I think the big challenge is how do we avoid that more people of that big minority that is probably relatively moderate around migration issues. How do we avoid that you're going to lose more of them to the far right and the more extreme viewpoints of migration, and make sure that they stay in the middle, basically, or come back to the middle, and where there's, I think, still space for a rational, humane, and also economically smart approach, and just humanitarian and empathy arguments are probably not going to win all of them over. But arguments around control, as well as economic arguments, can be combined with more empathetic and humanitarian views on migration. I think that's the challenge, and more specifically, the challenge is how do we make sure that all that research that is out there, as you said, Andrew, continues to find its way as best as possible. That's our objective, I think, to try and contribute to to policy development and try to shift the political debates. The Mixed Migration Review is a start. As I said in the intro, it's not going to provide all the answers, but we try to do as much as we can. And I think that very much came back in the discussion today as well, from the various viewpoints that we included today, from academic research, from local governments, from media, as well as from providing search and rescue and helping people at sea. So once again, thank you to all the panelists and to the audience. And we hope to see you next year at the launch of the next MMR, but hopefully sooner than that. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you all, and goodbye.